Now we're going to move on very quickly to look at the Northern Renaissance. The spread of the Renaissance to the north and to the west, to Spain, France, Germany, and England, was really a result of the end of the Italian Renaissance, when the French started to invade and the Spanish came into Italy, and then the Holy Roman Empire came into Italy. People were like, oh, what's this Renaissance thing that's going on in Europe? That's going on in Italy, and we kind of like some of these ideas, and so that becomes quite popular and will spread to much of the rest of the continent. One of the big characteristics of Northern Renaissance is that it's sometimes called Christian humanism. The Northerners combined the humanist emphasis on sources and applied it to Christianity in those Christian texts. As I mentioned a moment ago, the study of the New Testament in the original Hebrew and the original Greek. And as I also mentioned, that the critical analysis of those texts will lead in turn to criticism of the doctrines that were based upon them. So they will actively critique the teachings of the church based on the original sources of the Christian, both Old and New Testaments. But aside from sort of their more Christian leanings, the northern humanists also applied, just as the Italians did, applied their new approach to source analysis and study and essay writing to the service of those dynastic kingdoms, to the French monarchy, to the budding Spanish monarchy, to the English monarchy, in supporting them and in some cases being propagandists for them. Machiavelli would have loved to have been a propagandist for a unified Italian kingdom, but that did not happen. Other writers would be able to do that for France, for Germany, or for France, for England, for Spain. Germany is another case, like Italy, that really doesn't have much unity, so there is no kind of early nationalism that we'll see present too much in Germany, although the Reformation will provide a little bit of a national spirit. Probably one of the most important controversies in the Northern Renaissance was the so-called Reuchlin affair. This is it's sort of a minor footnote, but it really foreshadows something major. Johann Reuchlin was this very influential student and scholar of Hebrew grammar and Jewish learning. And so he was really what, in Christian circles would have been called an Old Testament scholar. He's really all about really understanding it from its Hebrew origins and how the Jewish people understood their texts, the Torah and other Hebrew literature. Well, his writings and his mode of inquiry was attacked by a Dominican scholastic named Pfefferkorn, who was himself a Jewish convert to Christianity and wished to suppress all of that Jewish learning, in effect to kind of defend the faith. There was certainly a very harshly anti-Semitic strain to Pfefferkorn's rhetoric. There's no question of that. Well, here comes the big battle between the scholastics and the humanists. The humanists, led by the great Germanic poet and writer Ulrich von Hutten, defended Reuchlin not against any kind of anti-Semitism. Reuchlin himself was not Jewish, nor were they concerned with the attack on Judaism per se, but they defended Reuchlin's academic freedom to study as he wished, and to apply humanist principles to the area of Hebrew scholarship. That's important for the idea of academic freedom, but it's also very important because when Martin Luther, in the early 1517, publishes his 95 Theses, and he is attacked by other Dominican scholastics. Many of the same humanists who had defended Reuchlin a few years before come to the aid of Luther, and they defend him on humanist grounds for his criticisms of the teachings of the church. So this Reuchlin affair actually betrays a very significant fault line in academic circles in Europe at the time. And finally, the list of writers is very diverse here, and there could be so many more. We've already looked at one, Erasmus of Rotterdam. Erasmus, for his Greek New Testament, is so terribly influential. Somebody would say that Erasmus laid the egg that later Luther would hatch, that it was out of that study of the Greek New Testament that the Protestant Reformation would emerge. His satire in praise of folly, he really he takes pot shots at every major institution in Europe at the time. It is quite a funny, amusing read, although the people that he was taking aim at, particularly the church, were not amused at all by it. Sir Thomas More, who would have been a near contemporary of Erasmus, and they had limited correspondence with each other, his famous work, Utopia, in which he looks at an ideal state, an ideal yet nevertheless very authoritarian kingdom, in which kind of equality is enforced from above. It's a very interesting work. Thomas More will himself be a Chancellor of England and employ humanist principles in the defense of his king, Henry VIII, until More himself falls afoul of Henry's attempt to reform the church in England, and More will be executed in 1535. Francois Rabelais and Michel de Montaigne, two examples of French essayists and satirists. Montaigne's On Cannibals is a very interesting little work to read, particularly because he's looking at the way cannibals behave in newly discovered lands, and you get the sinking suspicion that the cannibals don't behave too much better or worse than folks back in Europe. And then finally, another Englishman, William Shakespeare, arguably one of the greatest playwrights of the Renaissance. Well, certainly of the Renaissance, but probably one of the greatest playwrights in world literature. Shakespeare is widely translated and performed all around the world. His stories have a regal quality about them. They have a very earthy quality about them. They are in many ways eminently relatable, and yet tell a true human story. And of course, there are so many of them and so many great plays that's difficult for us to go into any one of them now. But his plays range from comedies, of course, to quite a number of history plays, to dramas and tragedies. All right, well, that's it for this section of lectures. Stay tuned for the next few. Thank you very much for listening.